Hello, I'm Caden Vaughn Clegg. This is a story called The Eclipse by Selma Lagerlof, translated by Velma Swanson Howard. There were Stina of Ridgecote, and Lena of Birdsong, and Kadsa of Little Marsh, and Maja of Sky Peak, and Beda of Fin Darkness, and Ellen, the new wife, on the old soldier's place, and 2 or 3 other peasant women besides. All of them lived at the far end of the parish, below Storhoyden, in a region so wild and rocky none of the big farm owners had bothered to lay hands on it. One had her cabin set up on a shelf of rock, another had hers put up at the edge of a bog, while a third had one that stood at the crest of a hill so steep it was a toilsome climb getting to it. If by chance any of the others had a cottage built on more favorable ground, you may be sure it lay so close to the mountain as to shut out the sun from autumn fair time clear up to Annunciation Day. They each cultivated a little potato patch close by the cabin, though under serious difficulties. To be sure, there were many kinds of soil there at the foot of the mountain, but it was hard work to make the patches of land yield anything. In some places they had to clear away so much stone from their fields it would have built a cow-house on a manorial estate. In some they had dug ditches as deep as graves, and in others they had brought their earth in sacks and spread it on the bare rocks. Where the soil was not so poor, they were forever fighting the tough thistle and pigweed, which sprang up in such profusion you would have thought the whole potato land had been prepared for their benefit. All the livelong day the women were alone in their cabins, for even where one had a husband and children, the man went off to his work every morning and the children went to school. A few among the older women had grown sons and daughters, but they had gone to America, and some there were with little children who were always around, of course, but these could hardly be regarded as company. Being so much alone, it was really necessary that they should meet sometimes over the coffee cups. Not that they got on so very well together, nor had any great love for each other, but some liked to keep posted on what the others were doing, and some grew despondent living like that, in the shadow of the mountain, unless they met people now and then. And there were those, too, who needed to unburden their hearts and talk about the last letter from America, and those who were naturally talkative and jocular, and who longed for opportunity to make use of these happy God-given talents. Nor was it any trouble at all to prepare for a little party. Coffee pot and coffee cups they all had, of course, and cream could be got at the manor. If one had no cow of one's own to milk, fancy biscuits and small cakes one could, at a pinch, get the dairyman's driver to fetch from the municipal bakery, and country merchants who sold coffee and sugar were to be found everywhere. So to get up a coffee party was the easiest thing imaginable. The difficulty lay in finding an occasion. For Stina of Ridgecote, Lena of Birdsong, Kadsa of Little Marsh, Maja of Sky Peak, Beda of Fin Darkness, and Ellen, the new wife at the old soldier's, were all agreed that it would never do for them to celebrate in the midst of the common, everyday life. Were they to be that wasteful of the precious hours which never returned, they might get a bad name, and to hold coffee parties on Sundays or great holy days was out of the question, for then the married women had husbands and children at home, which was quite company enough. As for the rest, some liked to attend church, some wished to visit relatives, while a few preferred to spend the day at home, in perfect peace and stillness, that they might really feel it was a holy day. Therefore they were all the more eager to take advantage of every possible opportunity. Most of them gave parties on their name days, though some celebrated the great event when the wee little one cut its first tooth, or when it took its first steps. For those who received money letters from America, that was always a convenient excuse, and it was also in order to invite all the women of the neighborhood to come and help tack a quilt or stretch a web just off the loom. All the same, there were not nearly as many occasions to meet as were needed. One year one of the women was at her wit's end. It was her turn to give a party, and she had no objection to carrying out what was expected of her, but she could not seem to hit upon anything to celebrate. Her own name-day she could not celebrate, being named Beda, as Beda had been stricken out of the almanac. Nor could she celebrate that of any member of her family, for all her dear ones were resting in the churchyard. She was very old, and the quilt she slept under would probably outlast her. She had a cat of which she was very fond. Truth to tell, it drank coffee just as well as she did, but she could hardly bring herself to hold a party for a cat. Pondering, she searched her almanac again and again, for there she felt she must surely find the solution of her problem. She began at the beginning with the Royal House and Signs and Forecasts, and read on right through to Markets and Postal Transmittances for 1912, without finding anything. As she was reading the book for her 7th time, her glance rested on eclipses. She noted that year, which was the year of our Lord 1912, on April 17th, there would be a solar eclipse. It would begin at 20 minutes past high noon and end at 2:40 o'clock, and would cover 9/10 of the sun's disk. This she had read before many times without attaching any significance to it, but now, all at once, it became dazzlingly clear to her. "Now I have it!" she exclaimed, but it was only for a second or two that she felt confident, and then she put the thought away, fearing that the other women would just laugh at her. The next few days, however, the idea that had come to her when reading her almanac kept recurring to her mind until at last she began to wonder whether she hadn't better venture. For when she thought about it, what friend had she in all the world she loved better than the sun? Where her hut lay not a ray of sunlight penetrated her room the whole winter long. She counted the days until the sun would come back to her in the spring. The sun was the only one she longed for, the one who was always friendly and gracious to her, and of whom she could never see enough. She looked her years and felt them too. Her hands shook as if she were in a perpetual chill, and when she saw herself in the looking-glass, she appeared so pale and washed out as if she had been lying out to bleach. It was only when she stood in a strong, warm, downpouring sunshine that she felt like a live human being and not a walking corpse. The more she thought about it, the more she felt there was no day in the whole year she would rather celebrate than the one with her friend the sun battled against darkness, and after a glorious conquest came forth with new splendor and majesty. The 17th of April was not far away, but there was ample time to make ready for a party. So, on the day of the eclipse, Stina, Lena, Kajsa, Maja, and the other women all sat drinking coffee with Beda at fin darkness. They drank their 2nd and 3rd cups and chatted about everything imaginable. For one thing, they said they couldn't for the life of them understand why Beda should be giving a party. Meanwhile, the eclipse was underway, but they took little notice of it. Only for a moment, when the sky turned blackish gray, when all nature seemed under a leaden pall, and there came driving a howling wind with sounds as of the trumpet of doom and the lamentations of Judgment Day, only then did they pause and feel a bit But here they each had a fresh cup of coffee, and the feeling soon passed. When all was over and the sun stood out in the heavens so beamingly happy, it seemed to them it had not shone with such brilliancy and power the whole year. They saw old Beda go over to the window and stand with folded hands. Looking out toward the sunlit slope, she sang in her quavering voice, "Thy shining sun goes up again, I thank thee, O my Lord. With new-found courage, strength, and hope, I raise a song of joy." Thin and transparent old Beda stood there in the light of the window, and as she sang, the sunbeams danced about her as if wanting to give her also of their life and strength and color. When she had finished the old hymn verse, she turned and looked at her guests, as if in apology. "You see," she said, "I haven't any better friend than the sun, and I wanted to give her a party on the day of her eclipse. I found that we should come together to greet her when she came out of her darkness." Now they understood what old Beda meant, and their hearts were touched. They began to speak well of the sun. "She was kind to rich and poor alike, and when she came peeping into the hut on a winter's day, she was as comforting as a glowing fire on the hearth. Just the sight of her smiling face made life worth living, whatever the troubles one had to bear." The women went back to their homes after the party, happy and content. They somehow felt richer and more secure in the thought that they had a good, faithful friend in the sun. And that concludes another reading. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.